A lot of people think drawing is just something that some people can do because they can better imagine what they want to draw or something like that. But drawing is just a combination of knowledge and different techniques. One of these techniques, and probably the most important, is construction. With construction, we basically take simpler forms and stack them on top of each other to make more complex forms. You've probably heard other people talk about using boxes or cylinders as guidelines, and construction is one of the reasons why those forms are so good. Boxes are simple enough to the point where you can draw them from any angle, and on top of that, it's also really easy to define where points are within the box. For example, if we want to find the point that's 1 unit high, 1 unit deep, and 1 unit across, we just have to mark these points in the box. Now, because of this, we can take a box and sculpt it into our desired form and then stack another form on top of it, and this gives us a more complex form. This is one of the most fundamental techniques in drawing, and this is what we're going to practice in this video. There are 3 forms we mainly use: boxes, cylinders, and spheres. Now, the first thing you need to know is obviously how to draw these forms in perspective. There's actually a lot that goes into this, and it would take me like 20 minutes to explain, but for boxes, you basically need to make sure that its sets of parallel lines properly converge to vanishing points. A sphere is a circle with other circles inside of it, and those circles turn into ellipses when we're seeing them from an angle. A cylinder has circular caps, and those circles also turn into ellipses when we're seeing them from an angle. These are just how these forms work from a surface level, so I might make another video in the future that goes more into this. A lot of the time, we also need to slightly alter these forms. Like, for example, we can add a taper to the cylinder, or we can make the top of the box rounded. And sometimes we also use forms that are a little more loose, which usually comes into play when we're drawing things like animals. So those are the forms we're going to use. There are 2, I guess, skills we need to talk about when it comes to construction. We first need to think about what forms we need to use to simplify whatever we're trying to draw. Like, for example, if you're drawing a scorpion, you're better off using cylindrical and organic forms instead of boxes. This is something that's pretty subjective because one person might use a form like this for the torso and another person might use a form like this. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes to choose certain forms. The second thing is actually being able to draw those forms, which comes down to understanding how perspective works and keeping track of how your forms exist in space. This is one of the hardest things in drawing because of how much perspective changes the way your forms look. Like, let's say you're trying to draw a symmetrical looking form. Something like this might look symmetrical, but it's not. This happens to every 3-dimensional form, and there's really no easy way to get better at it other than training your intuition. But in essence, construction revolves around taking forms that are easier to draw in perspective and then sculpting these forms into the form that you want. Now, let's give this a try. Alright, so for this, I actually want you guys to draw along with me. Now, to start with, we're going to draw a simple flower pot. I guess that's one of the simplest forms we can draw that actually shows how construction works. So the main thing about the flower pot is that it consists of a tapered cylinder, where the cylinder, of course, has an elliptical cap. And then on top of this tapered cylinder, we technically have another cylinder, which is a bit thinner. Now, what's kind of annoying about combining both of these forms is that this cylinder is slightly wider than this one. So the eventual form is basically, or I guess if we look at the outline of the eventual form, we have one line going like this, then it's going inwards, and then we have the other part going down like that. So technically what we could do is just kind of wing it, where we draw the top ellipse, and then from here we immediately go down like that, which is something that I have seen people do. And you could do it if you have good enough perspective skills. But if we want to draw this in a construction type of manner and make sure that everything is actually in the right spot in 3D space, we have to draw through our forms and actually mark where all of our landmarks are going to be. So technically, the first thing we can do is draw that top cylinder. So once we have that cylinder, we need to actually draw through the form, so we can draw that bottom ellipse, and then mark a slightly less wide ellipse within this one, which actually requires a lot of precision. But once we have that slightly less wide ellipse, from there we can extend the cylinder downwards. And now we know for sure that everything connects at the right spots. Now there's one other thing that we do have to keep in mind, and that's that the walls of the pot actually have thickness to them. So instead of it just being a connection like this, where it's just flat in this area, we have to make sure that when we draw that top ellipse, we leave a little gap right here. And then from here we can go down. This shows that that wall actually has thickness. So if we want to do this properly, I guess the first thing we'd have to do is draw a center line, which in this case will be the minor axis of the cylinder, which is a line that goes through the, or I guess perpendicularly through the cylinder. And then we would have to mark the major axis, which is a line that always creates a 90-degree angle with the minor axis. This is a lot of like knowledge on how to draw ellipses and cylinders, which I didn't really go over in this video, but it's just something you have to know. Like I said, I'll probably do a different video in the future that covers this. But once we have this, we'd have to draw the top cap. And I did say it needs to have thickness, but I think we can just add that later. It's probably a lot easier if we just draw the ellipse normally first, then draw the part that goes down. It would draw that bottom ellipse. Then, of course, make sure you go through the form. Then, within this ellipse, you would mark a slightly less wide ellipse. And then from here we go down again to draw the body of the pot. And then we draw the ellipse at the bottom. The thing with these ellipses also is that if we say that our horizon line is way up here, which would be the height of the viewer's eyes, the ellipses that are closer, I probably shouldn't have done that, but the ellipses that are closer to the horizon line are going to be less wide than the ellipses that are further away. So for example, an ellipse that's really close might be this wide, whereas an ellipse that's further away would be that wide. But that also applies to the flower pot, so the ellipse here at the top is going to be this wide, whereas the ellipse here at the bottom is going to be slightly wider than that. Then I guess once we have the rough drawing, we can go in again and kind of define things a bit more. And sometimes you would also have to draw this line here on the middle, because that does cast a shadow, and we use lines to mark where those shadows are. So yeah, technically you could place a line there as well. Also, with construction, a question that I see a lot is people asking, do I really have to do this for every single drawing? Or basically, do I have to place all of these guidelines just to make a simple drawing like this? And the answer is technically yes. But basically, the more you practice this and the better you get at it, the more your brain starts to do these things automatically, and you're basically imagining all of these guidelines instead of having to actually draw them. So again, with the flower pot example, once you start to get good at understanding how this construction works, you technically don't have to draw all of the guidelines anymore because you're just imagining it. Alright, now let's try this desk lamp. It's a bit more complicated, but it's still made up of a bunch of simple forms. So the main things are, we have the cap, which is basically just a cylinder. I should probably do this at an angle. Which is just a cylinder, but it slightly angles inward. Basically has a dome shape. And then attached to the back of that, we have another cylinder, which also has a dome shape. Then attached to that, there's again another cylinder, which is much thinner. And then the base seems to be just an ellipse with a slightly rounded top. And unfortunately, it seems like we have to deal with that exact same thing that we had with the flower pot, where there's a slightly less, or I guess a slightly wider cylinder attached to a less wide cylinder. So technically you do have to draw through the form to see where both cylinders need to be. But in this case, I guess the difference between the ellipses is so small that technically you could just estimate it, and it should be okay. But yeah, we have 4 forms. So when it comes to that top part, it's pretty easy. It's similar to what we did with the flower pot, where we have a vertical line, or I guess the minor axis. Then we would have a major axis, which again, 90 degrees. Then on that major axis, we can mark how wide we want the ellipse to be. And then we can draw the ellipse. Then we also have to mark where the top cap of this dome is going to be. So it's going to be right here. We'd have to draw another major axis, and then on this we'd have to mark how wide we want this ellipse to be. If you want it to be super accurate, you'd have to measure the proportions as well, which I didn't do, but I think this should be fine. So then we would draw another ellipse right here. Keep in mind, if we place the horizon line down here, again, ellipses that are further away from that horizon line are going to be less wide, or are going to be wider. So in this case, this ellipse here at the top is going to be wider than the one at the bottom. And by wider, I mean in this direction. So then we would just connect these. And that would be the cap of the lamp. And then we would have the other cylinder that's attached to it, which actually, now that I look at it, it's literally the same shape, except instead of being capped right here, it ends up with a kind of dome shape as well. So we would have a cylinder going like this. Keep in mind that if you place the minor axis, the outer borders of that cylinder are always going to be equidistant from that minor axis, which in this case, I think this one is slightly further away than that one, but doesn't matter too much. So again, we would mark the cap of this again, place another ellipse here, and then to finish it off, we'd have to place the dome. So we would extend this line a bit upwards, then mark where the very tip of the dome is going to be, and then we would just connect our lines to that. And also, it looks like there's another, basically the exact same shape as this, just attached to the top of it again. So we would extend the minor axis a bit more to the top, and then do literally the same thing, where we would mark the major axis, the cap of that is going to be there, and then again extend the dome shape. Then for the foot of the lamp, it's going to be similar to what we did with the flower pot. So we would have one ellipse right here. And again, this is if you really want to get down into the details. Technically, you don't have to do this in this case, because the cylinders at the bottom are so, or I guess the difference between the widths of the cylinders at the bottom are so small that technically you could just estimate it. But if you have to draw a close-up of it, then this would be good to do. So for that bottom part, we would draw another cylinder like this. I guess technically I should have marked where the minor axis was as well. Then we have a slightly thinner ellipse inside of this one, like that. And then it looks like there's just another dome shape right here. So we would mark on our minor axis where the center of that dome is going to be, which you have to decide those proportions on your own, by the way. I could have easily placed that point here, or I could have placed it here. It just depends on how tall you want that dome to be. So let's say we place it over there, and then we just connect that point and that point to that one, like that. Then technically that's it. From here, we just have to connect them. So if you want to do that, you'd have to draw another minor axis, and then you'd have to draw the cylinder, which remember that the borders of the cylinder are always going to be equidistant from that minor axis. But of course, in this case, because I drew both of these forms separately, they're both in different perspectives. So, you know, you can't just connect them like this. You'd have to make another drawing from scratch and actually make sure that they're both in the same perspective. But those are the basics of construction. It's one of the most fundamental techniques when it comes to drawing. And if you can master this, you can draw basically whatever you want, including drawing whatever you want from imagination. It is kind of mathematical, which might be a turnoff to some people, but you'll end up getting used to it the more you do this and the more you incorporate it into your actual workflow. Now, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like. Let me know in the comments what you want to see next. Don't forget, you can join our Discord server if you want to get advice from me or other artists. If you want to support the channel, you can do so through YouTube memberships. And I guess I'll catch you all in the next video.